Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Film Appreciation with Raghavendra sir. Today we're going to be talking about auteurs. Let's have the PPT. Let's take it away, sir.
See now this nowadays this business of the director is the in my opinion the director gets far too much importance nowadays. I mean it's as if that the director's vision, directors, and regardless of who the director is, everybody gets equal kind of thing. All directors get this great bhav, they get as artists, as creative, and it's almost like the painter or a writer. But there, of course, the difference is that the painter or the writer does everything on his own. Here, it's a collaborative effort anyway. And the script writer has a role to play. Everybody has a role to play. But the point is, it was not always the case. Okay, you can do the this is all right. It was not always the case in the 30s and 40s, for instance. 30s, this entire business of the director was not so important. It was not considered important. They were producing, they were mass producing films in some way. So it didn't have such an important position anywhere in the world. Of course, the major film producing country was USA, and that time in the 30s and 40s. And of course, France was there. Renoir was important. French poetic realism was important. But French poetic realism, what status Renoir has today as a great filmmaker, he didn't have that kind of stature, that kind of status when he was making movies in the 30s, right? So the
Sure.
point is that the filmmaker, the director was only some kind of organizer of the various things. He would put things together, he would do that, but his position was not so important. Okay, in 1954, okay, Francois Truffaut came up with what is a critical doctrine of some sort, which is called the auteur theory. It's not exactly a theory. It's more like a doctrine, like how films should be assessed, how what who's important in the film. It's a new way of shall we say evaluating the various contributions to cinema. Okay, and that became known as the auteur theory. Auteur is the author. Now, what exactly is the author? Tell me what is the notion of the author to you? What
That it,
exactly is
that
it?
that the creative proprietorship of the artistic the
Yeah,
artifact is solely of the author.
his vision, his guidance, and he takes responsibility in some way. He's responsible for the whole thing, and he finally gets creative credit for it almost entirely.
Sure.
This has happened now. This has happened in a big way, though actually, as I said, it's not really. It's not a valid proposition to give everybody that kind of status as author. Okay, it doesn't make much sense. So that has happened when he gave up this thing. The difference between the others. There was a guy called Alexander Astruk who came up with something called camera stilo, or something, which is that the style, the visual style of some sort of the filmmaker should be compared to a pen. Astruk himself did not make, I think, important films. I've seen one or two films of his. He's not a particularly important filmmaker, but he was there at that time in the French New Wave. That French New Wave, a lot of people who were there, became very important. They were all, most of them were critics from the Cahiers du Cinema with Bazin. It was highly influential. So this is the thing which went on, and what happened was at this time, um, the Truffaut came up with and many of these critics started looking at films from Hollywood, okay, which has generally been ignored. For example, I think the most important, there were some of them were already famous Hollywood directors, people like John Ford. He was already valued because he had established himself with the genre. See, genre is very important. Is it the genre or is it the author? That is the basic thing. Ford had already done something with the Western, right? But the people like Hawks were not taken so seriously. Hitchcock certainly not. So Hitchcock was one of the people to be extremely, lifted up through this author theory, and they started talking about these people, Nicholas Ray, the number of other people. I don't really know what they're, but the point is, they were able to take Hawks and find a kind of authorial vision in Hawks. One something with to do with the basically the macho, certain male kind of Hemingway kind of thing, what the manliness, some kind of thing, you know. I mean, if you've seen Hatari, I don't know. When I was a
Yeah.
boy, I saw this Hatari. I mean, became some kind of cult film at that time. When we saw it, and I saw it was a children's film and about animals and all that. But later on, I read about Hatari. It turns out to be some kind of auteur classic or something
Yeah.
about men, you know, fighting it out in some sense. Okay, and
But,
it's a pretty
but why do you
pretty.
think that this like this recognition of Hollywood filmmakers came in much later, only when the French New Wave guys kind of read it
No,
like
no,
that?
they read that, but the recognition of Hollywood came before the French New Wave started making movies in their roles as critics, not as filmmakers. Okay, Truffaut and all made their movies in when 1958 or so,
Yeah.
whereas 58 or so, and that was when the film that is when
Yeah,
he
I
made
mean,
his movies.
even as critics, when they recognize them as like when they recognize an Alfred Hitchcock like an auteur,
Yeah,
why was Hollywood not as artistically credible before that?
I'll tell you. I'll see. I think the French had a certain, you know, in the 50s, French intellectuals, the top dogs. Okay, Sartre and all these people, 50s and 60s, they were very important. Okay, so the question is, French had a certain, you know, a certain mystique in the 50s and 60s, which they didn't have earlier. And they lost also at a later stage. I think the French, you know, a lot of writers came into the public eye through the French. Okay, so the question is, I think the French had a certain glamour at that particular time. The Cahiers du Cinema and all that were very glamorous at that time. Now it doesn't have that kind of glamour. The French don't
Dying
have
out.
that kind
It's
of, no, it
yeah.
doesn't have that. It had the glamour, and they were, you know, if you look at the kind of philosophers, then people like what's his name, Althusser, okay, Roland Barthes. You look at all of them; they were very important at that time, right? So the question is that whole, that is the reason I think the French were taken very seriously. And moreover, you had Bazin, who was a great critic in the sense he was a theorist. He had done a lot of. I mean, he was not just a theorist. He was a theorist, not only a critic. Okay, so I would say that France, America itself didn't have that kind of, you know, intellectual critics were not there in the 50s. They came
Who
much
could read
later.
it like that?
Huh? You
I
could,
mean,
yeah.
America didn't have those critics who could read
Yeah, he
those.
didn't. Yeah, who couldn't. And I think the film criticism, as because film itself was not that kind of, you know, the 40s and all that. Film itself was not an important medium. When did, for example, when did the America get the intellectual, you know, the artistic glamour? Only in the 50s, right? When abstract expressionism, all these people started coming along, right? People like Jackson Pollock, all of them. I mean, there's a whole lot of these. So the question is, the avant-garde shifted there, film started. So I think 50s was a key period when America. So that there was a certain rigor which came out of France, and they started applying it to Hollywood, and also America was developing in a certain way. So American filmmakers started being taken seriously. I think Hitchcock, Howard Hawks, Nicholas Ray, I think Raoul Walsh. There were a number of these people who were very important. Okay. Now, you take, for example, I mean, just to give you an example of what it's all about, if you take Vertigo, you take Vertigo
Yeah.
as a film, okay? Now, if this film, if you look at the thing, it's written by this guy called Narcijac and Boileau. They were the two guys, French writers, who wrote a lot of these, they wrote a lot of these film scripts. I don't know if you've seen this guy's, what's his name? The man who made Diabolique. You would have seen Diabolique.
Diabolic by whom?
Diabolic. What's the guy? What is? I think Babu is there. You'll know. I forgot. Not Melville. It is the other guy who made Wages of Fear.
Wages of Fear. Fuck, I can't remember the name. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah. He's a very, very
I haven't seen
important guy. Yeah,
Diabolical,
yeah.
but Wages of Fear
Diabolic.
I've seen.
So Narcijac and Boileau were also very important film script writers.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Clouseau, Henry George Clouseau. Correct. Clouseau is the guy. Okay, I think. Yeah, Clouseau.
Those were-
So look at Vertigo. If you take it Vertigo, and I think most of you would have seen Vertigo, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
considered to be the greatest film ever made. Now, if you look at Vertigo, what exactly is that? I remember when it came out in the 80s or so, 80s or 90s, I think. Vertigo came out in the 80s. There was a review in the local paper saying
It
the saying
re-released in 80s, right?
yeah,
I
it was
mean,
80s. Yeah, yeah, re-released. Okay. For a long time, there was some legal dispute. It wasn't being shown. But
true.
80s, it was re-released. And then there was a review in a Bangalore paper, I think Indian Express or so. were called. I mean, I said the solution sticks out like a sore thumb. It's a bad end to a surprise, actually. I mean, the 80s. I mean, even in the 80s, Vertigo didn't have that kind of stature that it has now. Okay, they knew it was an important film written about it, but now Vertigo is somewhere else, right? So
Yeah.
the question is, what is Vertigo? If you look at Vertigo, it's much more than the screenplay. The screenplay of Vertigo. What exactly is there in Vertigo? Because it raises so many questions. Vertigo does. It's an extremely ambiguous film, though on the surface of it, it just looks like a thriller with some fake supernatural element and that sort of thing. But you look at it, just look at the film, right? Are you all of you familiar generally with Vertigo? I don't know if you're familiar
Most
with
of
it.
us, I think.
There
Yeah.
is this. It's about this guy who falls in love with this. He's asked. He's a detective who has a psychological problem. He's scared of heights because of a certain thing which has happened in the past, and he is asked to keep tabs on a person's wife who goes into fits of some kind of, loses her her memory or something, and behaves in a strange kind of way, and he starts following that woman, and he gradually falls in love with her. It's important. And then what happens is that yeah, then there's an elaborate story around her that actually she's inhabited by some ancestor who was in kind of how supernatural story is built around her. And actually, it turns out that the supernatural story is fake, actually, in the end. But the point is that she dies. Okay, she commits suicide at a certain point, and then this man is completely crestfallen that she's committed suicide. And then he goes and he finds another woman exactly like her, without that one's. You're familiar with the movie, no?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Without any of her mystique completely, and he starts dressing her up, dressing this very
In our own
ordinary
imagic.
woman up
Yeah.
to make her up like that. So the question is, okay, who he has fallen in love with is a woman who's never existed, right? She has never really been there. She's a woman playing the role of another woman, and he has fallen in love with the role played, that new role. Okay. Now, that point of the important point there is what exactly is that role that is being played, and this entire thing of love, this kind of sexual thing. I mean, what is it he's driven to? But the important thing here is that San Francisco is made a key player in that film, right?
True.
And there's a scene in which he follows her to the redwood thing,
Yeah.
Sequoia National Park. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
great scene, absolutely great scene.
Yeah.
And there's a thing, and that woman is there. He runs into her, and she's talking about her past. She was somebody called Carlotta Valdez, who died at some particular point in the 23 years or 25 years or so, and she's reborn, a descendant who's reborn as the same one. That reincarnation thing is there, and she puts her finger on one point of that, those
Three. Yeah. That's a.
tree,
Yeah.
the grains
Circles.
of the tree. He says, "I was born here, I died here, and you took no notice of me." I remember that line, right? And then there is this 1066. That tree is so old; it's got 1066, Battle of Hastings, and all that. So the question is, she seems to be somehow, this woman has her past has expanded so much that it's no longer just a role. It's as if she's been located in history somewhere. It's very difficult to say what exactly he's doing. It takes a lot of effort to figure out what he's trying to do. There's so much in this movie about the past, about this, as it's as if the whole of history has been somehow infused into this one woman, Madeline, I think her name is.
Madeline.
Yeah, Madeline. So the
Yeah.
point is, these 3 or 4 movies of Hitchcock. You take something like Rear Window. Rear Window. On the surface of it, he's spotted this murder, right?
Yeah.
Then the question is how does he go about it? What does he do about it? He's unhappy that he thinks at a certain moment that there'll be no murder at all.
Yeah.
He's actually starts looking at him, that voyeuristic glee in some sense of trapping that guy, that kind of thing, no? Is voyeuristic rather than that man. So the question is the moral issues that Hitchcock raises in all these three all of them are based on this thing of voyeurism, right? Getting into somebody else's life, trying to pursue that person's thing, trying to, vicariously living somebody else's life. These are all extremely complicated issues that Hitchcock takes up there. And I don't think Hitchcock, if you asked him about all these questions, he wouldn't know what he was doing, in the sense that
I mean, he
Hitchcock,
did know a little, like in the
no,
book,
in the sense
Hitchcock
he was
through
not
four, he says
articulate
that.
in that way.
Yeah.
Playing, yeah, but the question is, See, it's like this, okay? A writer, an artist need not articulate,
True.
okay,
True.
what he need not know. He's led unconsciously by various things, right? The
True.
point is, it is for the critic to lay out the rational foundations of whatever has been done. So my point is that Hitchcock is not such a, I mean, he wouldn't know all these philosophical issues that that critics have said about Vertigo. Various things have been said about it. What exactly this Scotty's thing is. Finally, what is Scotty doing? Don't go too deep. It's just a movie. You would probably say that, yeah. Just you would say probably say that. But the point is, it's that film is it creates such an impact on people that the critic is sort of pushed into understanding it in a deeper way. Okay.
True.
The point is that you can look at Hawks also. Hawks is not dealing. Hawks is also a very important filmmaker. If you look at Gentlemen Prefer Blondes,
Yeah.
Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is not an ordinary comedy. Okay, if you take for Some Like It Hot and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, both are Marilyn Monroe.
Billy Wilder, right?
Yeah, Some Like It Hot is Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is Hawks. If
Yeah.
you look at these two movies, both are Marilyn Monroe. Both have to do with gorgeous women and men running after them. But the Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is a different level altogether. I mean, it seems to, it's a far more complex film. It's not like Some Like It Hot. So the important point is that these auteurs were far more. I mean, suddenly they found that these movies by these people had more, had greater depth than was given credit for. And within the constraints placed on them by Hollywood, they were able to do a lot more. Okay. So the question is a lot of stuff. I think a lot of directors were generally disregarded. Robert Aldrich, for instance, they were not taken very seriously earlier, but suddenly they came to some prominence here. Okay, they came to prominence, and they were actually revived in many ways. And I mean, the important thing is it created a controversy a little later. The American, shall we say, the American proponent of this author theory was this man called Andrew Saris. I don't know if you heard of Andrew Saris. He was a critic, and he started. And the basic thing was, okay, that style, that this particular thing, this personal signature, okay, there was a certain thrill in discovering a personal signature of a filmmaker who had generally been neglected. So he started sort of valuing this personal signature in people who had been unknown. So they started. So this Pauline Kael wrote a nasty attack on Andrew Saris that basically, what are you saying? Are you saying that these crevices in the plot you shove in bits of style? Okay. So that is the thing. The crevices in the plot you shove in bits of style is what you're
But
talking about. He says, and the thing is, like for example, there are writers who write in the Saturday Evening Post who over a long period of time develop a literary style of some sort. Then you've got Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are too busy trying to say something important. Okay. So the question is, are you saying that these writers are more important than those writers? I mean, it became a big controversy. And
he never
later,
said that they were important. It was just that he was having the thrill of discovering
but no, no,
their
but
right.
the question is they valorize these people. Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, it's not simply that they're discovering the voices, that also these voices were very, very important. Okay. That these people, because that discovering that great thrill of discovering the author gave them, started elevating all kinds of people to higher status than the people who are actually saying things, right? Who are
Yeah.
very
But
serious at that particular time, some like Renoir and all that. So it got to a level where it got ludicrous in some sense.
what do you think about it?
Well, we'll continue. I'll tell you. We'll think about it later. Okay, we'll go into
Okay.
the next one. So this is the critical controversy. I think for exactly what an author is not very certain because it seems to have got into all kinds of things today. But okay, let's go to the next slide. I'll talk
Yeah.
about the
Next slide,
creation
please.
of the author. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Now, as I said in the last session, film festivals after the war opened up for cinema to international audiences. Exhibits. So the question is, from the 50s onwards, with this proliferation of authors in a different sense. Okay. Now, if you look at Bresson's first one, first Bressonian film, Diary of a Country Priest, or if you take Bergman's first Bergmanesque film, which is, I think, it would be A Clown's Evening. It's also called Sawdust and Tinsel. where you actually see the expressionist thing of Bergman, and Bergman emerging from the shadows of being an ordinary filmmaker to somebody who had something very serious to say, right? Now,
Yeah,
this is all in the 50s. Now, this art cinema was not in evidence earlier, right? This kind of thing was not in evidence earlier. As there's not much difficulty as you look at Renoir, for all his poetic realism, he's not a difficult filmmaker to understand.
absolutely.
He's not a difficult filmmaker to understand. So my point is that this new kind of artistic cinema created the artist. It was not the artist, but the question is, it posited the artist as an organizing, which the American cinema had to be dug out. So in American cinema, when you look at Hitchcock's Vertigo or you look at Hitchcock's Rear Window, Psycho, all these movies, you have to dig out the author, the authorship in that thing. Whereas you look at the European cinema of the post 1950, post 1950 European cinema, it's a completely different thing where these people are expressing themselves and they're actually drawing attention to themselves as people expressing certain things, right? Now the thing is, what this means is, okay, what the author means. What is the primary thing you need to do to discover the author in a film? You have to interpret the film, right? Okay. Now the camera style is not interpretation. It's detection of a certain style. It's not interpretation. My particular thing is that an author has to be interpreted. What is the meaning of interpretation? It means a worldview. Where does he stand in relation to the world? How does he look at the world? It's not simply a matter of his personality, right? It's not simply his personality. He has a view. He has a religious view, or he has a social view of society. He has a view of the sexes in some way, gender view, that sort of thing, right? So the point is this interpretive urge is a very, very important, it's a very important thing, that unless you interpret a particular film, you will never get a sense of the author. And you come out with when you come to people like Bresson, you come to Bergman, you come to Antonioni, Fellini, all these guys, Fassbinder, you come to these people. Fassbinder, of course, was later in the 70s. Antonioni was in the 60s, Fellini in the 60s, Bergman in the 50s, Bresson in the 50s, right? Now, if you come to their films, they adopt such a, shall we say, strange language of cinema. They adopt such a strange language of cinema, which is not really conventional language at all. They're actually drawing you into forming Bergman, not so much initially. It's not so much, but gradually as they go on, they become more and more daring. They take all kinds of risks. The Bergman's Smiles of a Summer Night is not a difficult film. Okay, it works. It's a fairly easy film. Clown's Evening, but I think Bergman got really difficult with the later things.
Cries and
Seven Seal also is
Whispers.
with the
Stencil is also
silence.
fairly simple.
Silence is a very difficult film. Okay, Silence. Whereas your Wild Strawberries and all these are rounded in some way, but gradually they become more and more difficult in some way in their movies. All of them
Would
become more difficult.
would you consider someone like, say, Sidney Lumet amongst these
No, he's
auteurs?
not. Sidney Lumet is very, very conventional American. He's got a thing to do. He's not. Sidney Lumet is not. He's American. He's not
But
French.
why? But why is he? But why is he considered like a very important figure? I mean, he wasn't part of the new Hollywood as well. He was
See, let's
somewhere.
let's no. We must not confuse importance as a filmmaker with being an author. They're not identical. There are plenty of authors who are no good. There are plenty of non-authors who are very good. For example, I would say Satyajit Ray is not an author at all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
By this definition, he's too versatile. See, one of the things with counting against an author is his versatility. Okay, he's supposed to go on and on doing the same kind of thing, the same kind
Like
of
Ozu.
movie. Ozu does that. Bresson does that. Your Satyajit Ray doesn't do that. John Huston does not do that. Kurosawa is far too versatile. So the question is, we must not equate the importance of a filmmaker with his authorial, shall we say, significance. It's not necessary that he should have, what do you say, the same vision of some sort. Not necessarily.
But is that a very important factor when you classify someone as an auteur, like like versatility as you spoke about? That if someone is versatile in the body of work,
Yeah, but you're supposed to find. I mean, the author things you will not find this what do you say, personal vision in Satyajit Ray. I would. I mean, he basically made his thing adapting other people's writing. Right? Satyajit Ray
yeah,
did that. Okay. Same thing with, I don't think, for example, what is Kurosawa's authorial thing? How would you look at Kurosawa and say that Kurosawa, there's a single vision in Kurosawa? No. See, the point is the genre dictates, the literary source will dictate, the text will dictate the vision in some way, right? It is not necessary that you have to impose your thing on the text. What does Ray do with Charulata? He may have done something with Charulata. It may be a better film than the story or something. But it's difficult to find a Ray element in Charulata. At least I can't find that Rayish element or whatever in Charulata. I think that
I
it's
mean,
a, yeah.
the gaze with which he approaches some, like, I mean, not to say to call it a very feminine gaze, but how he puts her in that.
Would you be able to use the same thing and find the identical thing in Pather Panchali?
No,
It is necessary. It wouldn't, right? Would you find the same thing in something like Jalsagar? No, right? You wouldn't find it. The point here is, whereas you take Bergman, you take Smiles of a Summer Night, and you take Clown's Evening or Sawdust and Tinsel, you take Wild Strawberries. Okay, you take Seventh Seal. This thing of death, this thing of fear of death, this thing of lack of losing faith. All these are things which keep recurring again and again, right? So the
yeah,
point is that Bergman, I mean, one of the criticisms made against his author theory is being repetitive becomes a virtue. This is one of the things I said about the criticism being made about the author theory, right? So the thing is, this entire thing of versatility. Okay, we must not take, we cannot. Can you say with certainty that Howard Hawks is a more important filmmaker than somebody like John Huston? No,
no.
I wouldn't say that, right? So the point is, Sidney Lumet is not an author. You don't find a single vision in this. He was a very forceful filmmaker who had a certain point to make. He was always 12 Angry Men. You take some of the earlier, some of the later movies. What are the Dog Day Afternoon, right?
Dr.
Dog Day
Afternoon,
Afternoon, Sidney
Network.
Lumet. Network, okay. You won't find, he's a forceful filmmaker, always with a point to make, but it's not always the same point. You could say he's a very socially conscious filmmaker. That kind of thing. He seems to be doing a certain thing. He's important in a certainly important, but does not mean he's an author. I wouldn't call him an author. Let's okay.
But even like when an author, like you call someone an author, and the thing is that they have to have a like repetition, as you said, becomes a virtue. But does it always have to be someone who has got the same notions that he's dealing with, and only that then he's an author?
I think so. The question is, in some way, you should be able to. Any Indian author, I doubt it. I don't know. I wouldn't find. Ghatak dealt with the same subject matter again and again and again. You could possibly, call him an author in some sense.
Mrinal Sen to some extent.
See, Mrinal Sen is a party man, okay, in the sense that he's what do you put it? He's a political guy, right? He has a political viewpoint. See, you've got to understand this. It can't simply be a political point associated with an ideology. That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about a personal vision, right? A personal vision means a personal view of the world. Here you've got an ideologue. Mrinal Sen is an ideologue. Ghatak is stronger because you don't find that kind of naked politics in Ghatak's films. Okay. Well, in Mrinal Sen's films, the politics is absolutely naked. You know exactly what he's saying. You know that he's Marxist. You know that all his beliefs are Marxist. He's giving you Marxist cinema. It's the same you wouldn't find, for instance, if you take Pontecorvo. Pontecorvo is another Marxist filmmaker. He's got, would you call him an author? I wouldn't call him an author because he's not, he follows a certain political ideology.
But then, of course, like as you mentioned in the beginning as well, that it's not just a distinctive style in terms of the treatment of the film or the technicalities.
Camera style is something else. It's not camera.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But that also somewhere is a factor in recognizing someone as an author. That it has its imprint of a way of looking at stuff. Like even if the scenes are distinct and the gaze is different and the notions are different, the way of shooting or the way of telling that story.
G. Aravindan, yes, but G. Aravindan, yeah, I would possibly, but it's very difficult to say what that is. Nobody seems to have figured it out. What G. Aravindan's view? They use the word spiritual, but nobody's really figured it out. But the point is this, okay. I would contest the thing that any person who's making films according to an ideological perspective has a vision. Okay, this vision implies, for example, it implies a certain personal way of looking at the world ordered in a certain way, which is not based on theory, which is not based on ideology. A person who follows an ideology and presents that ideology in film after film after film cannot be called a visionary in any sense. An author has to be a visionary in some sense. He must have a personal thing of some sort, a certain recurring personal concerns in some sort which he doesn't share with other people. That's very necessary. Okay, a person who follows an ideology, okay, and illustrates the ideology in film after film after film, I would seriously doubt that he has the credentials to be called an author. Okay, now we will go on to the next one. Let's look at, for example, just to tell you, the point here is that these films, these authors who came out of this post 50s cinema, their films had to be deciphered for their authorship to be discovered, right? For that, for example, all of you have seen Blow Up. You would have seen Antonio's La Ventura. Not many would have seen, maybe, but Blow Up, I think everybody would have seen, right? Okay,
Yeah.
what do you take Blow Up? What do you take Blow Up, the film? I mean, because I'll tell you, just generally give you an idea what I think of the movie. Okay, what is this movie about? Okay, what is it about? What are you making of it? It's about this guy who goes to this park, takes pictures, and finally he's not able to make sense of what is happening. We don't make sense of what is happening, but finally he takes these pictures and puts them around and comes to some kind of understanding. Okay, he comes to some understanding of what he thinks it is. And like, actually what he's doing is he's taking um, a certain set of arbitrarily taken shots and giving them a narrative of some sort in his head. He's trying to give that a narrative. He's trying to give it a certain kind of meaning which doesn't already exist. Okay, so this is basically a thing. Now I would like to know, what do you make of that tennis sequence in the last that is culminating part of the movie, right? That imaginary tennis ball. What do you make of that imaginary tennis ball? What do you make of that thing? What does it mean in that film? What does that imaginary tennis ball mean in that film? You remember that scene, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Play a tennis match. There's no tennis
Yeah.
ball. The ball goes, and this chap is watching, and he sees guys nuts, complete nuts. They're just playing with the tennis ball. There is no ball at all. Okay, they're just imagining there's a ball. Then finally, what does he do? He's co-opted into the game. He picks up the imaginary tennis ball and throws it back, and they continue playing. Right?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
It
What do you,
says
what do you
the
understand of
pieces
that?
that he was trying to put together. I mean, I read it like that. The pieces that he was trying to put that weren't there.
Okay, what if look, this entire event of the tennis match is not in any way associated, not in any way linked to that
Yeah. I mean,
the
that's how
picture,
I
right?
read that, just to make
Okay,
sense of it. Yeah.
my own sense is, okay,
Yeah.
that any narrative, for anything to be turned into a narrative with a meaning, you have to put a certain theory, a certain perspective into it, which is taken from outside, a component. Like, for example, if you look at history, if you look at events in history, to put them together, you must have some belief in some kind of theory. It's
True.
like Marxist theory. If you put Marxism into a chronicle of events, you'll get a certain picture. It's like the ball. Okay, you put the ball into the thing, their gestures make sense. If the ball is taken out of their game, okay, their game
Yeah.
makes no sense altogether. Okay, so that is the way I saw it. That for you to make sense of anything, to give it a narrative, to give it some kind of meaning, you'll have to bring something else from outside, some kind of belief in some kind of system.
True.
That
Exactly.
pattern will have to be introduced somehow, though there is no real pattern there.
Exactly. That's what I said. The pieces
Okay,
that weren't there,
but the
in a
point
way.
is this: this is what we have to, for film to make sense. We have to go around and talk about this. We have to look at it, and we have to identify. So this is the thing. Okay, so the blow up is an interesting thing. You have to interpret it. The point is that Antonioni and a lot of these people go on insisting that you interpret their films. Without interpreting their films will make no sense at all. Okay, so they demand, and obviously their kind of cinema, because they demand an active viewer of some sort. There is this thing called narrativity. It's very important. This notion of narrativity. I've not put it up in the slideshow. What exactly is narrative? What do you get in a film, right? What is it you get in a film? What you get in a film is basically images, sounds. So the question is, what are you doing when you go to a movie? You're basically putting all together and putting a story there. The narrativity is the sense of making narrative sense out of a series of images and sounds, right? And
True.
words. Okay, words and images are put together. So the point is that story which is happening, okay, is happening in your head. It's not there in the movie. So the question is, the movie only facilitates you to create that thing. Usually it's not a big problem. this thing of narrativity, what the film is actually trying to say, what is the story, following the story is not a difficult thing. But then people like Antonioni and all these people like these post 50s art filmmakers, narrativity becomes a crucial issue in many of their movies. Not Satyajit Ray, but I'm saying somebody like not even Fellini so much, but people like Antonioni, Bergman, many of them it becomes Bresson also. Bresson, something like L'Argent is a very difficult film. I don't know if you've seen L'Argent.
Well,
Very
what's the
difficult.
name? What's the English name of that film?
L'Argent, the
No, I
last
haven't seen
one,
it. I haven't seen
Money, or Silver or whatever, Money, I think. Okay,
it.
the very last film of it. It's a very difficult film, extremely difficult. But the point is that the difficulties of these movies are on the surface that you are required to make sense of them in the normal course of saying what is this film about, what is he trying to do. This is the basic thing. Okay, now we come to this thing of, and I just demonstrated this a little bit through Antonioni. Okay, now we come to this thing of misunderstanding authorship. Now the point is, repeated of what's happening today is that this term, because it's so valorized, this thing of the director, the notion of the director is so highly valorized that cinema is it's being used as an indiscriminately as a selling point a lot. In fact, I saw a book, I came across a book which was in the process of being considered. 20 Bollywood authors today, 20
The book?
Bollywood, a book, authors of Bollywood, 20 of them around today. What are we talking about here? You know, if you talk about every person who makes a film, that makes 3 movies, makes 4 movies, you call him an author and you get somebody to write an article about it. How does it? Where is the world view? Where is all these things which they found in people like Hitchcock and Hawks? Where is that there? You know. But the point is, we need not associate the value of a film with its authorial component at all. There are any number of great filmmakers who are not authors in that sense at all. I mean, I would, let's see if I've got a list of who I've written. For example, yeah. So the point is, if a person like then, I mean, number of movies. I don't know if you come across some American filmmakers like Jules Dassin. You come across Jules Dassin?
Jules doesn't know.
He made this movie called Rififi, French in France. He went
Yeah,
away. Yeah,
but
Rififi.
he did Jules doesn't know in America he didn't make any films, right? Like
He made,
Rififi I've
yeah,
seen.
Thieves Highway. I think
Yeah, I
something
didn't
in
know
the
that.
Tender City. He's an American. He's not French.
Okay, I've
He's
seen just
American.
Rififi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of these Americans who were working in the time of the McCarthy era, he went away. In fact, I like his American movies very much. Naked
Naked
City.
City.
Yeah. Something and the City. There's one more. Some 2 or 3 he made. He's very good. Excellent. There's another man called Fleischer. I don't know if you know this.
Fleischer.
Fleischer. Uh,
What was the full name?
Richard Fleischer, I think.
Richard Fleischer.
He made Soil and Green. He made a lot of very good movies. He's very good, but not an author. Okay, he's a very competent filmmaker. He made, I think, 10 Rillington Place. He made a lot of very good movies. The Boston Strangler. He made good movies.
The Vikings, I think. I've
The
heard of
Viking,
some.
probably he made a lot of stuff. He was a very prolific. He's made one called, I think, the. Uh, I mean,
Let's
you have a
see
look
his
at his
IMDb
stuff. He's
right
very
now.
good, extremely good. He's again, he's a in India. You know who I would highly rate more than, say, for example, Guru Dutt, who's a very
Hmm.
highly Guru Dutt is some kind of author, right?
See.
Because
Yeah.
he was very personally very self-absorbed, and he was obviously putting himself into film after film. He was self-indulgent in some way. So his persona he put into his movies as an artist, as this, as that. A filmmaker who was very quiet behind the scenes, who didn't really come out, was Raj Khosla. I rate Raj Khosla very high in Indian cinema, but not many people have really, they don't rate Raj Khosla. Guru Dutt is made much more. I think Raj Khosla was Guru Dutt's assistant or so. I found Raj Khosla more interesting as a filmmaker than Guru Dutt. The Guru Dutt is obviously saying more important things. Raj Khosla was just making movies. Okay, so the point is versatility. I would put as a very high, as a very high, I mean, value.
Distinguishing factor.
Yeah, very high value on a filmmaker. If a filmmaker has versatility, it counts for a lot. Okay, then you come to other aspects of an authorial vision, which could be unpleasant. Bergman, for example, I dislike Bergman because I find his worldview unpleasant in many ways. Okay, there's a certain, I don't know, there's a certain If you've seen Cries and Whispers, if you've seen something like Scenes from a Marriage, there's a certain word. What is the word I would use? There's a certain misanthropy, right? There's a certain distaste for human beings, for women, for all this sort of
Yeah,
thing you find in Bergman, very strong. Gets much stronger, I think, in, for example, you look at somebody like Kieslowski. You look at Kieslowski. I don't know. They made so much of Kieslowski, at one particular point, right? But the point is,
very gloomy
not
way of
only
looking at it.
gloomy, he's very anti-women. I don't know if you've seen.
True.
I mean, if you've
Double
seen
Life of Christoph Kieslowski you're talking about, right? Yeah.
Kieslowski.
Yeah, of course, Double Life of Veronique and all these
I
things.
wouldn't call Adur Ray. And I would, yeah, I would, author I wouldn't use for Ray or Adur from the way I've described it. Adur did a lot of experimental stuff. He did a very innovative stuff. But I don't find that initially I thought that Adur was some kind of an author because there was some sense of behavior. He was a kind of, early movies are very behaviorist, like in the Romer sense, I found. But later he seems to have gone away from that altogether. Ray too versatile, I would say, which is again, as I said earlier, does not mean Gurudutt may be a stronger author. I think J.P. Datta is an author in some sense because he's very much preoccupied with Kshatriya Mors, war and that sort of thing. He's a Sam Peckinpah, violence. Okay, he's a Sam Peckinpah of India would be J.P. Datta. Sam Peckinpah is an author, wouldn't he be?
But his way of looking at stuff, like, have you seen a film like Gulami? Have you seen Gulami?
I liked it very much.
Yeah, I love that film, and it's
Yeah,
very Leninist in that
Batwara.
nature.
Yeah, it's I find Gulam very caste issue is
Caste
very
is
big.
there, of course, but
Yeah,
the way of looking at dealing with, like, it's very Leninist. I found it very Leninist.
Leninist.
Yeah, in the sense,
Yeah,
like the idea of revolution, like every
yeah,
scene is talking
right.
about that.
No, I liked his caste. He's probably the only man who said something like in
Yeah, in
one
the
movie.
80s. Yeah.
He said 80s films were very good. I didn't like the films after that. That I think Batwara or Gulami. I think Gulami or where Amrish Puri says, "I'm a Thakur first and a policeman afterwards." He says. You
Nasiruddin Shah
remember
says. Nasiruddin Shah says that.
Nasiruddin Shah or
Yeah,
Amrish
in
Puri?
Gulami.
Gulami,
Yeah.
Nasiruddin Shah.
Yeah, Nasiruddin Shah.
Nasiruddin Shah was excellent. So the point is that these Yatim, another one. My favorite, of course, is Hatyar. My favorite. Yeah.
Hakikat.
Hatyar.
Hatyar. Oh,
Hatyar. Okay. With the Sunny, what not the Sanjay Dutt. Okay.
Sanjay Dutt.
But I mean, you find this sort of thing is very interesting. But he's also very competent. He's some kind of Sam Peckinpah of Bollywood would be, but he hasn't got his. He's a
Dude.
pure
Yeah.
handle. He has not got his due. I'd say. Okay. But the point again, coming here is these things of misanthropy, misogyny. Another person, for instance, would be the guys I would say really great, but not but not authors in this great filmmakers would be Jules Dassin, Richard Fleischer, okay, George Franju. You say I don't know. Have you any of you seen this movie called Eyes Without a Face? You heard of
Who?
this movie, Eyes Without a Face?
Eyes Without a Face.
Yeah,
No.
Franju, Franj. You should see that. I mean, it's a masterpiece, horror masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of cinema. Nobody knows Franju. You should watch this movie, horror film. Okay, poetic horror. He's a master of camera style. He's a master of again. He has a very creepy approach. He's a person who may not be an author, but a great filmmaker. French, probably greater than most of the French New Wave also. He was a little old, so he generally, because the French New Wave generally threw him out of some sense. He lost his thing. He would be very important. Okay. Another is Kalatozov. I don't know if you've heard of Kalatozov, the Russian guy. Okay.
Which film did he make? How
Kalatozov
do you
is
spell that?
Kalatazov. Kalatozov. Okay. He made this movie called The
Mikhail
Cranes Are Flying.
Kalatozov.
Mikhail Kalatozov. The Cranes Are Flying. You should see The Cranes Are Flying. And you should see a film called Letter Never Sent.
Letter Never Sent.
Letter Never Sent. I think these two masterpieces. But the point is, he's not an author. He's basically a Soviet-style filmmaker, somewhat propagandist in some sense. But the point is that he's a master of camera style. But all these people, because of this thing of authorship, they haven't got. Of course, the Russians have remained in the shadows for a long time. Nobody paid much attention to them. But the important thing, okay. Another important thing is that filmmakers, regardless of whether they're authors or not, peak at a certain point. In fact, you look around for filmmakers, and you're looking for films, don't look at all their films, right? Don't look at all their films. You will find that in that trajectory of filmmaking, most filmmakers make two or three good movies clustered together. You usually find that. For example, I'll tell you somebody like Almodovar, an author by all means. Okay,
True.
if you take Almodovar, what is his peak output? Two movies, just two. Okay,
Which ones do you think?
Talk to Her and All About My Mother. Only two movies, right? The rest of them just down. Okay, earlier movies not so good, later movies not so good. These two masterpieces he made, but they were all leading to that and they're leading away from that. But basically, these two masterpieces are what will sustain him. A lot of them are like this. So the question is whether subsequently they follow the same principles, whether they do the same thing or they don't do the same thing, is not of great importance, because the films are not such great films anyway. So that's the thing. Okay. Another thing I would look at is this thing of some filmmakers work very well in a certain historical situation. I would say Bellatar is some such person.
Yeah.
Okay, Bellatar was set Europe on fire at some one particular time. He
Yeah.
made three or four good movies. Hungarian, yeah, Bellatar is Hungarian. He made three or four good movies right at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the last years of the Eastern Bloc. Okay, and all of them are around the collapse of. If you look at for Satan Tango,
Yeah.
Damnation, Satan Tango, probably the only ones. And he's made this Workmeister Harmony.
Brockmeister's Harmonies. Yeah.
What do you think of Workmeister? What do you think, again, interpretation? What is your understanding of Workmeister Harmonies?
I think it's about like how I read it is like this gloomy reminiscence of a past is what I felt like. There's
Yeah,
this
but you know
town
what?
and there's this.
What is this prince? There's a prince who's making political speeches, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there is the sacred object, which is the whale.
And he's a drunkard.
No, the whale, the
Yeah.
prince comes and talks, and sets thing on fire and starts a revolution. What is the idea of that whale? What do you make of the relationship between the whale and the thing?
I don't know. Yeah.
It is the relationship between a prophet, okay, and the sacred object the prophet is associated with, right? There's
How?
always the sacred object. There's always a sacred object. You take a religious leader, there'll be some sacred object, some stone somewhere, or whatever, there'll be something, right? Okay. Or there'll be a Marxist, you take Lenin as a prophet, you will find Marxist Das Kapital there as an object,
Yeah.
right?
True.
So the whale is that sacred object. This is my reading of the film. Is that sacred object that all prophets need somehow to point to. They that sacred object is something which it be completely arbitrary in some sense. Okay, some relic of something. Okay, it helps mobilize people around it. It has religious significance almost, right? So my sense is that this prophet is warrior prophets, what you call warrior prophets. There's a warrior prophet and the sacred object. All warrior prophets, the 10 commandments around Moses. Okay. So the question is that warrior prophet needs a sacred object of some sort to point to as some evidence of divine. This is my sense of otherwise, what is that whale doing there?
Yeah, but why a whale? I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it like, for example, it's the same thing. Let's not mention religions, but all religions have the sacred object. What is the relationship between a stone and what do you say, a prophet? Nothing, right? Okay. So the point is this: that there is really no particular relationship between the sacred object and the person who is and the warrior prophet. But the warrior prophet comes always in association with that. So this here, what he does here is so. He's talking essentially about the thing of Marxism there. He's talking about Marxism. And then the sacred object is some book. Okay. Das Kapital. Okay. Something like that. Okay. And this guy Lenin
Quite a
coming,
reading,
screaming his
yeah.
head off. Okay. And when he comes and does this, people go around burning this, burning that, destroying this, destroying that. This is basically it. So that's that is my reading of the film. And I think it's a particular critique of Marxist thing or whatever, or of Soviet thing, which came at that time. But once this thing passed, that 1991 or 92 passed, there was no longer any point in this thing. It is lost all relevance. So I think Bellatar lost his relevance. So I think he's dead. Is he alive? Bellatar.
He's alive, I think.
He's alive. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure.
He stopped making movies also.
Yeah.
So the point is, subsequently, you look at something called the Turin horse, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's not important even, I would say. Okay. So this is the thing. Okay. Now, what else is there? What I want to say? Okay,
Oh,
the
but
point is,
why? One more question regarding Ruckmaster Harmonies. Why do you think he made it in black and white?
which one?
Ruckmaster Harmonies.
All his films were black and white. He works
Yeah,
best long
but
takes. Uh,
why? What is his preoccupation with that?
it's I think it's very difficult to establish what do you say the color, the use of camera style with the content of the film. It's very difficult to associate that. I think camera style is something else. Tarkovsky's black and white and color alternating. Can you? I can't make out what is Tarkovsky's. I've never been able to figure out what is this thing of part color, part black and white. He says of he doesn't give you any. Tarkovsky is one more
But
filmmaker
he's
who
making Tarkovsky made very spatial kind of a films, right? Very
correct, yeah.
space. So he kind of demarked that with, of course, with that kind of tint. He wasn't even like complete black and white. There was always tint. Um, but
Also,
it with
various colors he uses doesn't use
yeah,
the same.
but
Yeah,
Bellatar for some reason, like as you mentioned, now that you mentioned it, I thought that it was black and white because of this. I mean, this is very like surface
uh,
reading kind of a thing. That because of that downfall of the Soviet Union
uh,
and the films that he majorly kind of were culminated around that, it was kind of looking back at that time in a
possible.
very
Yeah, it's possible. But the
meek
point
way.
is that he felt very comfortable in black and white. Obviously,
Yeah, of course,
even
we felt better
subsequently, even Turin
composition
Horse
too.
also black and white. No,
Yeah, Trin House
all
was
of them
black.
are black and white. The Man from London also black and white. I've not seen that. I don't
Man
know,
from
but
London, I
it's
haven't seen
difficult
it.
to say. I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't hazard a guess actually why he does that. They seem to. But the point I want to make at the end of this particular thing is that recognizing somebody's signature is no reason to value a film. Okay, would you put Cohen brothers? Cohen brothers are not authors. They probably, in some sense, they have a certain weird sense of humor of some sort. I mean, would
And
you
the way
put
of
that?
looking at the worldview that you're talking about is also like it's also the same throughout
Yeah, no,
each
Cohen
film.
brothers probably authors in some sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a certain certain comic cruelty in them in their movies, which points to some kind of some kind of vision of some sort. It's a certain barbaric thing. At the same time, it's comic in some way. Probably, I think, if you, I mean, Tarantino is postmodern. He's too playful. I don't think Tarantino, nobody who has a vision of the world is going to kill off Adolf Hitler in 1945 or so. Ken
Ken
Loach is
Loach.
an ideologue. He's a left winger, and he's only dishing out left wing messages. I would put him in along with Mrinalson and Pontecorvo. He's not even interested in cinema. Ken Loach is not interested in cinema at all. Pontecorvo was, but I'm saying Ken Loach is not interested in cinema. He's just giving you his messages. That's all. I
Is
don't.
Scorsese too versatile, sir?
So
Scorsese?
Scorsese is too versatile. He's not an author at all. I wouldn't
Okay,
say.
we discussed about Stanley Kubrick like in an
Yeah,
earlier
no,
session.
Kubrick is a little difficult. I won't ring about it right now. He has a personality, all right. I wouldn't call him an author. He's a personality and satirical. Is basically his attitude is satirical. In that sense,
Satirical of the auteur.
he has a tone, right?
Yeah.
Satire is his basic thing. He has a certain thing, but he's probably an author in some sense in that way. Scorsese is not, but Kubrick might be. But as I said, it's not really important because it doesn't matter whether a person is an author or not. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Now the question is, filmmakers all have different capabilities, right? Some people are good at handling actors, very good at handling actors. John Schlesinger was very good at handling actors. Some of them are very good at choreography. Okay. Jacques Tati is great at choreography. Okay.
Absolutely.
Some are very good at composition. Bergman is great at composition. Okay. Now these capabilities come to people use these capabilities. It's just a matter of time before you realize what you're good at, right? Okay. Russians by and large are very good at choreography. I don't know if you read see this guy's films, Alexei German. You see this
Yeah.
guy's films. I mean, his choreography is impeccable. His compositions are impeccable. His camera tracking movements. Another great filmmaker who but nobody seems to know very much, even in the film schools in India, is this guy called Ophuls, Max Ophuls. If I heard of him,
Yeah, Max of he used
Ophuls,
to
Earrings
the
of
way he used
Madame
to
Da.
move the camera. That was
Yeah, fabulous.
yeah.
Okay, Earrings of Madame Da, and this I think Letter from an Unknown Woman. I think I would put as the two great films of Ophuls. Kubrick was very influenced by him.
Yeah, yeah.
Garman also uses the camera in that way, in crowded thing. He can move the camera around in crowded spaces. And he also uses deep focus, which uses both deep focus and camera movement. Is very important. The point is, some directors have fondness for genres like Sergio Leone and the spaghetti western. Okay, the point is that the point trying to make is that basically an authorship has to do with tone, has to do with attitude to the world. In that sense, you could say that like what's his name? This guy Kubrick he's got a certain acidic certain view of the world. But is it enough to simply take these recurring concerns, and also necessary that that recurring concern should lead to profound statements of some sort? Okay, there should be depth in that, right? Okay, you take somebody like Spielberg. Was Spielberg an author?
I don't think so. Like the way
Nobody
you
would call him
describe it,
an
no.
author, right? He's too
No.
popular. But the point is this: you look at his movies. Every single film is around the nuclear family. Every single film has to is a valorization of the nuclear family. You look, for example, look at E.T. Let's
Yeah.
look at E.T. Right? Okay. Now answer this question. In E.T., why is that family? In that family, why is that father absent?
Of, I mean,
In
because of
E.T. the
course it's
film.
a that's how the guy latches on his emotional need on that alien
Yeah, correct.
because
So
he
the point is, yeah. So it's like this, that if you have an atom with an electron knocked off, okay, what happens? The atom becomes charged in some way.
yeah
Okay, it becomes an ion. Okay,
yeah
when it becomes an ion, it can bond with something else, right?
true.
Okay, so the question is the absence of the father in some way polarizes the family. Okay, Spielberg. Okay. The point is that Spielberg uses this family motive film after film. Now, you take, for example, something like Schindler's List, right?
You know,
Schindler's List. It's in my opinion, it's a very bad film. In my opinion, I don't like that film at all. And there is a certain thing which is actually objectionable. You remember this one wagon load of husbands or something is men are let off, are saved, and they go along. No, they go along, and there's another wagon load of spouses or something which is following them. Then it turns out that the second wagon load, okay, is not their spouses at all, but somebody else altogether. So what they do is they send that wagon load back to the concentration camp and get a wagon load of spouses so that the families can be reunited. Can you believe this? I mean, this is what happens in that movie. Which means, if you say you have saved my life, you saved my wife's life, okay, but instead of my wife's life, you send somebody else, okay. I say no, no, no. You send that person back. I want my wife. I mean, which means that that person is sent to his death. Okay. So if you say we don't want these people, we want the original some other people, that means those people who have actually been saved by providence, are sent to their deaths by this choice. Nobody seems to have understood this at all. That it is actually a passing a sentence of death on those guys who have been saved. Okay, which makes this Schindler culpable. It makes him culpable for genocide. Okay, for having sent people who are already saved by accidentally by providence. If you have faith in God, or if you have faith in Yahweh, or you have faith in what is this in Christ or whatever. Okay, you have to have faith in providence, that basically that God is letting in. When false providence is saved certain that people accidentally, can you send them back to their deaths and get somebody else? I mean, this is a serious, what do you say, philosophical inadequacy in Spielberg. No critic seems to have figured it out. Okay, you can't do this. Okay, the point is that Spielberg, in film after film after film, family is most important. Jaws also, family is important. So if you look at it that way, you could say that Spielberg is actually an author in terms of the nuclear family. There's no film of his where the family is not crucial, right? The point is, what is it worth? Is the question. It's not worth very much, no. The point is, just because you repeat yourself, you have the same concerns. It is also necessary that what you have to say should be original. It should be profound in some way. Okay. Now these are extremely important things. So we cannot simply talk about author as having a recurring vision of some sort, a certain thing, right? Now let's look at, for example, Orson Welles. Is he an author? No, I don't think so at all. He's not. He did great camera style. He invented the deep focus. Was probably the first guy of
Yeah, yeah.
Renoir. I think
Citizen
Renoir had
Kane.
already used it. But the point is, he used deep focus in a completely new way. And Citizen Kane, in terms of film grammar, is a masterpiece. Okay, he used tracking stories. So the question is, camera style is very important in the works for a lot of people. But camera style must be relevant in some way to the content. In some way, the content is very important. What are you trying to say in the course of the movie is very, very important. And if you are able to, in the course of a certain set of movies, come out with a worldview, then you're an author. But nowadays, what is happening? A lot of people are inventing film styles for themselves. Tsai Ming Liang, okay, film is a filmmaker. But what is that to my? What do you know Tsai Ming Liang, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What is that
Rebels of the
camera
Neon God.
movement of his? What is he really doing? What is that worth? That camera style? What is it worth? Is it enough to because he's got this thing which hit upon some idea. Bellatar also in some way, but Bellatar has something so serious to say. Simon Liang stories are not that kind of profundity. I've never found in them. They're nice films. They've got something, but the point is it in any way linked to that camera slow pan which takes 15 minutes to go from one end of the room to the other end of the room? Is it 5 minutes or 6 minutes? Does it? It's so slow. Does it have anything? But the point is, he's invented a style for himself, and his signature. The point is that signature is valued. You take Kieslowski, you take somebody like Wong Kar-wai. What is Wong Kar-wai's camera style?
It's very like the wide angles,
You
cramped
know what he
spaces.
does? He
Yeah,
illuminates the background in one color, okay, red.
and he contrasts
Okay,
it with
and
the.
the foreground he illuminates in another color, which is exactly
Yeah,
what Kieslowski did, right? But the point is, it's very striking to look at it. Wong Kar-wai can't shoot outdoors at all. He
yeah.
has serious problems shooting outdoors.
When he
Everything is
does,
indoor in his
it's
movies.
very
It's
it's
very,
very
in
like
fact, he's
closed
made one
spaces.
very good movie which I like is that, which is that In the Mood for Love. Beautiful film, right? In the Mood for Love, it works. But the other movies take something like 2046 and take something like, I mean,
Days of Being Wild,
no, the other famous Chungking Express.
Chungking
Okay,
Express. Yeah,
it's this basic thing of illuminating background in one color. I think green, bright green, foreground in one color, bright red,
primary
or the
colors.
other way around, right?
Yeah,
So what happens is, I mean, you look at it, the same thing with Kieslowski also. Kieslowski made some early Polish movies which were not even noticed very much. He got bad reviews in New York Times and all that. He got bad reviews, right? But the point is, later thing, Kieslowski reinvented himself with the Double Life of Veronica, okay, and the later, especially those the trilogy, he invented himself
color strategy.
visually, yeah. But the point is, there's not very much to say. He's
I mean,
a
there is, of course, like color strategy is about the commandments of the
red
French.
flag.
Yeah,
So, so what?
I mean, but he's also talking about the moral decay
I
of that.
find I find his white misogynistic. Okay,
But it's about a guy who's misogynistic. He's
no,
like,
no. He is misogynistic. This one also. What is that called? Short film about love. Also very misogynistic. What is that? What is that about? Short film about love. This guy is trying to spy on that woman or some
yeah,
such
he's a
thing,
peeping tom. Yeah,
and then peeping tom or something, and that woman throws him out or some such thing, and takes thing, and he tries to commit suicide. Then that female feels sad. That this is basically it.
that's a very regressive way
That's
of
all.
looking
This
at
is
it.
all
And
there is. There is in that. That's all that there is in the movie. If you look at short film about no, not short film. You look at white, three
yeah,
colors white.
yeah.
What is it? He's impotent. Okay. Then the wife throws him out and wants a divorce from him. Then he regains his potency and he goes back to the same wife and she's sitting and he decides to leave her. I mean, what kind of stuff is this, right? It's in my opinion a very regressive view of women. I don't know how you just escape notice. I find this Kieslowski a very dubious character. And what is the first one? Blue about? Blue, red, I've forgotten.
Blue
Blue,
is
what is
about
it
this
about?
woman who's trying to move on
It
from
is
the
a
family.
fact. It is the fact that without that great husband in accompaniment, the woman is incomplete. That's what I would look upon the film as. The woman can't survive without that great husband who's producing some music.
But
He's
she
probably
choo-
the only guy.
yeah,
Kieslowski is probably the only filmmaker who uses music, okay, rather than use music to support his film. He builds films around his music. He's got this guy called Chrysler, okay.
yeah.
Priceless music becomes the basis of the movie. If you look at the
In
blue,
blue, right?
yeah, Chrysler's music is the basis of the movie. The same thing with Double Life of Veronique. this priceless opera or something, that thing which becomes the basis of the movie. The movie is not supported by the music. The music is supported by the film, which is a completely different thing, right? I mean, you look at the people like Kieslowski. I mean, I'm really, think about this. But the point is, he's author of some sort. He's given a lot of importance. So I have doubts about people like Kieslowski. Wong Kar-wai, I said, Pokuvale, Pokuvale is not even, I would say, is not even visually striking. I would find Estepan visually striking. Pokuvale is boring actually. I try to see this. I try to make sense of Pokuvale. It's actually it's a sort of boring, quite boring. I liked Estepan is brilliant. I think Tampu was very good. But this is the whole thing. The point is the fact that you can recognize an author is not a crucial point in appreciating his importance as an author, right? Now we come to the last thing. I want to say that what's his name? Roland Barthes announced the death of the author. So academics won't look upon this author as anything important at all. To them, it's only the text which is important, right? So all they talk about is text, text, text. They're not going to look at the author at all. What the author is, what they think is not important at all. So this is the French thing. So the question is authorship is basically a cinephile film club kind of obsession and a kind of thing about who the author is, whether the author is important, or that sort of thing. It's really, we need not even to consider this very seriously in um, in dealing with, in cinema, that a great film can be made by non-authors, right? And
Of course.
authors can make bad films. So the question is that this is not tantamount to discovering an author in a work is not tantamount to raising that work to any level. Okay, having said this, I'll stop here. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.